Hi, this is Mujtaba Al-Hilo, and this is another lecture in the course of short story. And today we are going to focus on another perfect masterpiece, literary masterpiece that is really interesting and joyful. And reading this story gives you so much ideas, gives you so much energy. If you dig deep inside this story, you will have some moral, understandings. You may change into a better stance. I hope. I do not want to be a perfectionist, but it's really nice. It's a perfect, beautiful, joyful, pleasurable story that we all should read. So, before anything, I would like to advise you that you pause this lecture right now and go and read the story, the short story itself. Now, before you move on, you have to read the story itself, the text itself, because it is really important to understand the story. Because it doesn't matter how much I explain about the story and the characters and the theories and the themes of the story. You should read the story itself, the text itself, in order to have a better understanding of what is going on today in this lecture. So please, right now, I will be waiting for you. Pause this lecture and go and read the text. Okay, I suppose that you have read the text, and now let's move on. The best thing to do while studying literary text, a fiction, okay, a piece of fiction, we have to study about the biography of the writer. We should know where he was born, in what age he was born, and what theories, what movements, what ideologies he has experienced. Because those ideologies, that culture, the culture he was born in, the place he was born in, the people he met, the theories, the books he read, they all shape his ideas, shape his literary text. That's why it's really important to start with the biography of the writer, to understand the historical context, the political context, the cultural context of the writer, in order to have a better scholarly analysis and evaluation of the literary text. So let's move on and let's start by the biography of Oscar Wilde, this amazing writer from Ireland. Oscar Wilde, in full Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wells Wilde, born on October 16, 1854, in Dublin, Ireland, died November 13th, 1900 in Paris, France. Irish wit, poet, and dramatist whose reputation rests on his only novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, published in 1891, and on his comic masterpiece, Lady Windermere's Fan, 1892, and The Importance of Being Earnest, at 1895. He was a spokesman for the late 19th century aesthetic movement in England, which advocated art for art's sake, and he was the object of celebrated civil and criminal suits involving homosexuality and ending in his imprisonment at 1895. So the most interesting thing that we should notice and we should highlight here is that he was born in Dublin, in Ireland. Look, the Dubliners, those people of Ireland, those writers, we have so many great writers from Dublin, from Ireland. They have their own perspectives towards the world. That's why we find that type of social criticism. We find that the last type of conflict that we have studied in the previous lecture, character against society. That's the dominant type of conflict in Dubliners, in the writers from Ireland. That's why we find social criticism, political criticism. We have that ideological criticism in the writings of Dubliners. From the authors from Ireland. Oscar Wilde was no difference. He perfected this type of writing, this type of social criticism in his writings, as we will see in today's story, short story, The Happy Prince. So the first and the most important thing that we should notice is that he was from Ireland. And again, we should put in mind that the Irish literature is different from the English literature, because English people, English writers, they were the people of authority. They were the people of the government. That's why their tone, their attitudes, their perspectives are completely different from those from Ireland. The Irish people, they have gone through a very long history of revolution against England, against London. That's why we find that revolutionary tone in their writings, that insurgents in their writings. They do not accept the dominant ideology of the government of London. That's why we always find revolutions, social criticism in their writings. And this is the case for Oscar Wilde. So let's move on and let's start with plot summary. And I suppose that you have read the text itself, that you have read the story itself. Because look, there is a fact, a universal fact, that nothing can take the place of the text itself. You should read the text itself. Otherwise, no summary will take the place of the text, because you have to read the text in order to have a better understanding. So I suppose you have read the text, but just as a reminder, I'm going to present here the plot summary of The Happy Prince. High above a city stands an ornate statue of the Happy Prince, recently deceased. He oversees the town and is pained by the suffering of his people. One night, a swallow who had not gone to Egypt with his flock for the winter because he was pursuing a beautiful reed, arrives in the city and rests on the Happy Prince statue. The swallow notices the prince is crying, and the prince explains that during his lifetime he had lived in a palace devoid of misery, and therefore had never experienced sorrow. Now, though he can see the suffering of his people, he then asks the swallow to distribute the gemstones and gold leaf from his form to various families in need. The swallow loves the prince and decides to stay. By the time winter arrives, though, the Happy Prince is stripped of all his beauty, while the swallow dies of the harsh cold. As a result, the Happy Prince's lead heart breaks. When the mayor finds the statue in such a decrepit state, he decides to take it down, melt it, and make an ornate statue of himself. The lead heart and the dead swallow are discarded like they are nothing, but when God tells an angel to bring him the two most precious things in the city, the angel brings him the dead bird and the lead heart. So it's a very melancholic story. It is a tragedy, and it has a very sad ending. Again, it is not a realism tone of story, because look, in the Victorian age, the time that Oscar Wilde was writing, realism was the dominant form of literature. Here we do not have that type of realism. We have some reflection of the miseries of the society, but it does not reflect one-to-one reality. It doesn't work as a mirror that reflects every detail in the society. Here we have imagination, we have some unreal things happening, we have the speaking of the bird, we have the movement and the emotions of that statue, which is impossible in reality. And that's, of course, one of the good points, one of the mastery of Oscar Wilde in his writings. Let's move on to the second part, and we are to talk about the characters. Number one, here we have three main characters here. Number one, the Happy Prince. The Happy Prince here is the protagonist, okay? He is the protagonist of the story. Once a sheltered prince who led a life of pleasure, the Happy Prince was turned into a gilded statue upon his death and placed upon a pedestal overlooking his town. The prince is described as exceedingly beautiful, with golden skin, sapphires for eyes, and a ruby on his sword hilt. Although his external beauty impresses everyone around him, he sees that beauty as only skin deep. His true worth lies in his compassion for his townspeople and his willingness to sacrifice for them. The happy prince suffers, however, due to his sympathy for all of the misery he can see from his high perch. The happiness of his name is thus ironic, as the prince describes having only experienced a false happiness in his previous life of pleasure, when he was ignorant of the true misery surrounding him. The prince is ultimately a Christ-like figure, looking over humanity and sacrificing his life to alleviate their pain. So here we have that development in the character. We see that the character here develops in his morality. During his lifetime, when he was alive, he didn't have that feeling. He didn't sympathize with his people, with his surroundings. He didn't have that sympathy for his people, but he recognized the importance of sympathizing with people. He recognized and discovered the miseries of his people only after he died, only after he became a statue. Okay, that's why we have that perfection. We have the development of the character here. Okay, and we have this type of the last type of conflict. Character against society here. We see that type of conflict. So we have again a very, very sad ending, that nobody cares about them and nobody remembers them, and nobody really knows that they were the doers of such great things. Only God was aware of these sacrifices that the happy prince made. So here we have the symbol of sacrifice. We have the scapegoat, okay, and he is the ultimate symbol that we want to arrive at. Okay, and let's move on to the second character, which is the swallow. The other protagonist of the happy prince, the swallow, is a bird en route to Egypt for the winter. His trip is initially delayed due to his temporary passion for a reed, foreshadowing to the thematic importance of love in this story. Although he wants to join his companions in the sunny land of Egypt, he begins to love the happy prince and remains in a town to help him deliver jewels and gold to townspeople in need. Although not as selfless as the happy prince, he repeatedly emphasizes his desire to live and enjoy all of the beautiful things abroad. The swallow comes to love the prince and understand the value of doing good. In the mentor-mentee relationship developed between the pair, the swallow plays the role of a younger mentee who needs to be set on the right track. At the start, he expresses fear at delaying his own pleasure for others, speaking in the context of the typical Victorian ideals, while criticizes throughout the story. However, his love for the prince helps him grow and proves that moral behavior can be learned. In the end, the swallow makes the ultimate sacrifice out of love, because the prince goes blind after giving away his sapphire eyes. The swallow decides to stay by his side forever, even though he knows that the remaining through the winter will mean certain death. This sacrifice ultimately lands him a place in paradise for eternity, reinforcing the story's moral that anyone can change and choose to do good instead of acting selfishly. So here we have that type of character, okay, who needs to be taught, who needs to be developed, who needs to get perfection, okay, in his life. And again, as mentioned here, Wilde tried to criticize the Victorian life. At that time, the Victorian people made their major ideas and their major perspective one was towards life, how they can become better in life, how can they buy better things and have a beautiful life and live a higher class life, and how they can become bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie means the higher class of the society. So people's mind was dominated by these ideas. Here Wilde tries to criticize those ideas of the people, those superficial ideas that, okay, you should develop yourself, this life of superficiality, of materialism, will lead to nothing, will lead only to death. The only thing that makes you immortal in heaven, in paradise, is to do good things to people, and that's why he succeeded to some extent. Again, this is a very sentimental story that the writer tries to provide to his readers. This type of sentimentality fade away after Victorian. In modernism and in postmodernism, we do not find such straightforward, simple social criticism. We do not find such teachings in short stories. We do not have that type of sentimentality in stories after the Victorian age. But this is the type of stories we find in the Victorian age, in the 19th century. So here we have social criticism, we have the development of the character, we have the perfection of the character, we have the immortality of the character, and how the character turns from being a selfish person into a selfishless person. In the beginning, the bird wanted to follow his heart and to stick to the reed and to follow his flock to Egypt, but finally he changed his ideas and found out that the ultimate happiness lies at helping people and making the society a better place. The third character that is of great importance here in the story is the reed. Although she appears relatively briefly in the story, the reed still has an important role. The sparrow initially falls in love with her for her slenderness and beauty, and delays his migration to warmer territory in order to wait for the reed. However, all his friends disapprove due to her poverty and having so many relations. She decides not to travel with the sparrow, which ends their relationship and drives him away to the town where he meets the happy prince. However brief, this romance sets the stage for the romantic love between the sparrow and the prince. The ill-fated love between the reed and the sparrow also introduces the theme of judging falsely by appearances and the negativity of gossip and pure judgment. So here the reed plays the role of the foil. If you agree with me, you might have other ideas, but here we can say that the reed is the foil of the sparrow. Here we have that type of conflict between these two, and how this conflict leads to the perfection of the sparrow. Okay, so again we have this type of conflict, character to character, which is another type of conflict that happens mostly in short stories. So here we have the conflict between these two characters, the sparrow and the reed, and finally leads to the perfection of the sparrow. And now let's move on to the themes. And the first, we can find limitless themes in this short story, but here we are with some of the most important themes that we can find in this story. Number one, beauty and morality. Oscar Wilde was notably committed to aestheticism and the aesthetic movement associated with art for art's sake, and this theme recurs throughout his literary works. The protagonist of The Happy Prince is himself a statue meant to decorate the city, and through him the story explores the relationship between art and usefulness. However, The Happy Prince also demonstrates the darker sides of society's obsession with beauty, that is, the extreme poverty and social inequality required to support corrupted lifestyles for those living at the top of society. This turn to morality resonates with Victorian values while still condemning that society for its hypocrisy. First we should know that Oscar Wilde was committed to a movement, to a literary movement at that time called aestheticism. Aestheticism means to write literature for the sake of beauty. I don't care about, for example, about morality. I don't care about ideology. I don't care about policy. I don't care about the society. What I care about is the beauty, is the beauty of the world, the beauty of society. That's why he wrote for the sake of beauty, for the sake of art. That's why we find this justifies this aestheticism in the stories of Oscar Wilde in The Happy Prince here. This justifies the simplicity of the idea of the short story, because he wanted to be so forward, so straightforward, so simple, so clear about the ideas, because he was writing for the sake of beauty, not for the sake of philosophy. That's why he wrote his messages so clearly and so simply. That's why we have this theme of beauty and morality. These two are so clear in this short story. Let's move on to the second one, the themes of poverty, inequality, and greed. Oscar Wilde was a proclaimed socialist and lived in London during a time when millions of the impoverished residents risked dying of starvation. According to The Happy Prince, the majority of humanity leads lives of great misery and suffering in order to support the greed of the few with money and power. The greed of the wealthy causes immense suffering, and this story takes a scathing stance against the state of inequality that forces so many people into lives of destitution and hardship. Human greed and obsession with appearances result in evil and true ugliness. These corrupt tendencies extend to all parts of society, from education to politics to art and justice. Although Wilde was a proponent of this decadent and wealthy lifestyle, this story demonstrates his consciousness of the costs that can be wrought by profound inequality. So here, one of the main ideas, here we have social criticism. Here we have the conflict of characters against society. Here we have the social criticism and how that problem of classicism was so dominant at that time. By the way, at that time, we have the debut, the rise, the power, the climax of Marxism, the appearance of Marxism at that time. The theory was still developing, the theories of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and how they criticized the problems of classism and the inequality in the society, the conflict between the proletariat, the working class, and the bourgeoisie, the higher class. We have that conflict. The conflict between classes was so dominant, was so powerful at that time. The poverty was so dominant. It was one of the major symptoms of the society, poverty of people. That's why so many people were dying out of starvation, the low costs that the workers were receiving from the capitalists, from those in power. So these problems in general, they created such a great problem, such a great misery in the society. Here, Oscar Wilde tried to talk about these problems and try to propose some solutions to these problems, to the problem of poverty, inequality, and greed of the capitalists, of those in power. And he, of course, we cannot say how much he succeeded in his messages, but they were powerful and they were effective. And the third theme here, we have the theme of sacrifice and compassion. Though it is clear that the Happy Prince has made a sacrifice, so too has the swallow. He has left it too late to fly to Egypt, and as such, the cold of winter kills him. This is important as it highlights just how dedicated the swallow is to the happy prince. On several occasions, he could have abandoned the happy prince but chose to stay with him as the happy prince helped others. If anything, the swallow has served the happy prince well, even though he did pay the ultimate price for his actions. Though the happy prince knows that he is being stripped of everything he possesses, he continues to help those in need. He can see that there are others who are more in need than himself. At all stages in the story, the happy prince is concerned more about others than he is about himself. He is selfless. So here we have the theme, the idea of altruism. Altruism, it means selflessness. It means sacrifice. It means compassion. So because he followed the ideology, the movement of aestheticism, forced its followers to write about sacrifice, to write about compassion, to write about sympathizing with others. So we have these types of ideas in the stories of Oscar Wilde, especially after he discovered the inequality of the society and how people were dying out of starvation. So let's move on to the next part and let's talk about the symbols of this story. The lead heart. What does it mean, the lead heart? What does it signify? And what does it imply in this story? The happy prince has a heart made of lead. Lead, it's an element, it's natural element, which breaks when his beloved swallow dies of the cold. At first, this lead heart appears to emphasize the superficiality of the prince's beauty, though it later comes to symbolize the steadfast nature of love. In the beginning of the story, the lead heart reveals that the gold decorating the prince's outside does not carry through his insides. This advises one to avoid judging by appearances as they can be deceitful. However, as beauty comes to represent illusion and even corruption or deception itself throughout the story, the ugliness of the lead heart does not prevent it from engendering compassion and goodness. As the prince himself declares, "Though my heart is made of lead, yet I cannot choose but weep." Unlike in many other fairy tales, such as Snow White, Wilde does not support the conventional pairings of beauty with goodness and ugliness with evil. This inversion truly centers on the heart, at once the least objectively valuable and most truly precious part of the happy prince. We have the lead heart, as we have observed here in this text, that the lead heart in the beginning, it symbolizes the superficiality of this world, the beauty of this world, and it doesn't have any moral meaning. But finally, when the happy prince, the statue, reaches some level of perfection, that symbol of beauty, that symbol of the world, of the superficiality of this world, it breaks, it collapses, and it's a reference to the power of morality, how it can dominate, how it can break the world, how it can break the superficiality, the materialism of this world. And of course, he was genuine, he was innovative. Oscar Wilde was innovative in his writing, in the sense that he did not put beauty and goodness in one place, and ugliness and evil in one place as well. He tried to make a paradox, the paradox of beauty and immorality. On the other hand, we have morality and ugliness. So he made such a successful paradox in his short story, and it's really nice and beautiful. And the other symbol here we have is we have the appearance of children. Wilde invokes children as a symbol of innocence in order to emphasize the corrupting force of society. Evil is not born, but taught. Furthermore, as these children are innocent, they cannot deserve any of the suffering or misery they are forced to undergo. That children are forced to suffer exposes the toxicity of the root of civilization. For Wilde, children make the ultimate symbol for suffering, as their freshness and youth preclude any possibility of guilt. Look, the idea, the symbol of children, it is so dominant in the writings of the Victorian writers, in the poets, in the novelists, in the short story writers. We have the appearance of children so much in the literature of the 19th century, in the Victorian literature. For example, the beginning of writing about children, we have that beginning with William Blake in his poems, when he described the bad situation of children at the society in England. And for example, we have Charles Dickens in his novels. We have the suffering of children. Here we have with Oscar Wilde the suffering of children, how they are treated badly, how the society turns them into becoming some beasts, into becoming monsters. The society steals from them their innocence and give them guilt and experience. That's why we have that type of suffering of children and how they lose their innocence in that corrupted society. So